I'm good. I'm good. Um, Community call, lots to talk about. Something, probably something some of the Omis want to get a bit of a better idea on. I have a bit of an idea what it might be. Do you have any ideas, Zeus?
Uh, I don't know, man. Wonder. Not
Think,
excited for this.
think back to what was dropped last week. Uh,
Yeah. Uh,
what did we?
Racking my brain. Um, Obviously, probably the bod stuff. I would imagine.
Yes, yes. So I think we'll kind of keep that. That'll be kind of the main thing we kind of run through today. But I wanted to just wait for others to kind of flow in before we kick off. Is anyone at ETH Denver right now? I live on the arse end of Earth, so I didn't quite make it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish, man.
No ETH Denver up in the chat. Nothing. Damn. When's Omi Day? So the 3rd of March? Did Ohm go live on the 3rd of March, or was it kind of mid March? I can't quite remember.
It was 23rd.
23rd. GE
I,
Glory
I would
GE.
imagine Omi Day is 3-3. I don't know why, but
Yeah, like I mean, I wish there was 33 days in a month. That would be helpful. Unfortunately, there's not though. What's up, Ohmies? Keep piling in. I've got Zeus up here. Um, just seeing if we can seeing if there's Indigo here at all. Or if anyone wants to come up, feel free to jump up. Jaws, Apollo, welcome to jump up.
Hey, Drop, how are you?
Good, good. How's things?
Hey, everybody.
Are you are you up at ETH Denver by chance? Oh, did Jaws jump down? Waiting on Indigo if he can join. I'd love him to be up here as well. Oh, that was Apollo. Oopsies. Did not see who joined. Yes, it is being recorded. With if Jordan could drop the Twitch stream in the AMA chat for people who want to see it over there, or at least watch the VOD afterwards. Feel free to do so. But I guess some things we can talk about besides the white paper before we kind of get into that a little bit more. The Curve V2 pool deployment RFC, that's exciting. Maybe we can kind of like get into, I don't know whether you were involved in that much, Zeus or Apollo, but maybe we can get into like why that is somewhat bullish news or potential bullish news, being a request for comment, obviously not an OIP yet, and then also like the Frax finance whitelist, which is also exciting.
yeah, I like the Curvy 2 one, and it's a nice. I would say that it's pretty superior to Unity V3, just in that it accomplishes the same thing, but you don't have to do any active management. It takes care of that on their end with the EMA approach, or I don't know quite how it works in technicals, but and then I know as well that Redacted is looking to move some of their liquidity over there, so it'll allow us to kind of retain that routing with them, which I view as pretty valuable to us. Um, yeah, like the more that we can help them build their liquidity, I think the better.
So like I guess the thing is like ohm moves all of its liquidity or like some of its liquidity to curve, pair it with DAO ETH, redacted kind of follows, ohm bonds all the CVX, for example, to redacted, stakes for Geo Butterfly, directs all the votes to ohm pools, keeps bonding curve to redacted, something along those lines, right? Something to do like
Yeah, I mean, there's
some
also
kind of flywheels like that.
there's a huge level as well of with our convex position, we can use that to secure a gauge and push emissions onto our own pool, and either gain extra liquidity or just gain additional convex curve voting power. Which who doesn't like that, right? And I think that if curve V2 is going to be like a dominant kind of liquidity source, we should definitely be there. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I guess like one thing, because I know that, like how do you think moving into the curve wars, like kind of like how does that kind of align, or like how do we interact with the kind of tokamak infrastructure, for example? Because I know that they're obviously like pushing their kind of decentralized market maker. They're very much you know amongst releasing the actual product. So I guess I'm wondering like how do you see like those two sides of kind of controlling emissions through like liquidity provision kind of playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of look at it as why not both, right? I'm pretty sure that Domac tends to be, they're doing curve V1 pools at least for the T assets. I would imagine that it's on their roadmap to be deploying liquidity into the V2 pools. So I think there's an opportunity to, I guess, hit it from both sides. Seems like a good move.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I need to see more things going on in the chat. Seems like everyone's very sleepy. Maybe people are waking up. People are tired. What's been going on,
Yeah.
Omis? What's been going on last week? Announcement?
Everyone in Denver.
Should we? I know everyone's too busy in Denver. No one's Discord native anymore. Sad stuff.
Into your mind.
Do we have any Omis over in Denver right now? I mean, if they are in Denver, they're definitely not on Discord. That's for sure. um, and I'm trying to also think of the and then the Frax whitelist. Again, Omis, if you haven't checked any of these out, these RFCs, request for comments, whatever we want to call them, they are over in the general section within the forum. But kind of maybe we can, because we currently have we're pushing 10 mil worth of FXS, right? And we've kind of got that max lock on, moving into Frax kind of teasing their FPI, not FBI, hopefully FPI launch. So maybe we can kind of chat on the rationale there. Maybe like helping some of the Omis like understand why Frax is our one of our pilot partners if we think back to the first protocol that we launched with.
First on, man.
But I feel like we're very much pushing
Long-standing
the space with
relationship.
Frax. Yeah.
I'm a super, I'm very excited for the FBI. I'm hoping that, obviously we need to wait for it to be a thing. But, when it is, and, under the assumption that it works as expected and as intended, which, I think seems like a relatively safe one. I would imagine that there's going to be a push to turn that into a treasury asset, which, I would see as making a lot of sense. Kind of like built-in yield, right? Stablecoin where so excited for that. I believe isn't the snapshot is like Saturday or something, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it'll get pushed in the next day or two.
Yeah.
So that's
So
exciting.
we'll have some built in, I'm pretty sure, just with that FSF stake that we have. So that'll be cool.
Awesome. That's very cool. How you been
All
going,
right.
Apollo? Haven't had a chance to talk with you in a while. How have you been feeling in these last
Yeah,
couple of months?
been fantastic. Been fantastic watching how we are growing in spite of the market conditions and adapting to what's coming in 2022. Right, a lot of projects coming out of the DAO, integrating and growing the ecosystem through partnerships and Olympus Pro. So a lot of exciting new developments, including
Mm-hmm.
this bonding discussion that we're having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for those who don't know what we're talking about when we refer to this bonding discussion, I've just linked a command in the AMA chat with the actual
Oh,
RFC that Zeus
shit.
posted the other week, the white paper and the link to the white paper and then the PDF itself. So I'd actually recommend, as we talk about this a little bit more in depth, for you to kind of go and either click on any of those links, preferably maybe the request for comment to start with. But as we walk through some of the main things for OMIs, you can kind of use that as a guide as we're going through things. Might actually help kind of you follow the conversation a bit better.
Yeah, you want to jump into it?
Yeah, let's do it. Indigo's just jumping in, but he'll kind of jump in
Oh,
midway.
okay.
But let's do it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I was just trying to not stalling, but I was just trying to like wait for India to jump up. But we can get into it.
Pad the time a little.
Yeah. We can get into it and wait for Indigo to jump up. But I guess we talked about it actually a little bit yesterday, but maybe we can get into like I guess the main takeaways from the paper itself, if we were to condense it, for some of the OMIs who you know have this like notion of like I just 3-3 and chill. What do things change for them? How big of a proposed change is this? Obviously, it's not happening anytime soon. Just want to really hone in on that. This is a long term vision. So maybe just like running through what would change for your regular OMI who just wants to be a part of this in that context specifically.
Yeah. The high level, right, is just, leaning into the bonds to expand kind of the scope and, value add that staking or the staking activity, presents to the network. Um, so there is an added level of complexity, but the cool thing is that opens opportunity for new protocols to come in to serve people in our community by abstracting away that complexity. So we add a bunch of protocol level benefits. We add a bunch of independent holder benefits if you're looking to do more sophisticated activity. But then all within the guise of kind of it's adding optionality, right? So you have the option of, doing more, active activity or, staying where you are or joining a vault that, does that active activity for you. Um, all within the guise of, like a bunch of protocol benefits, I think, and holder benefits that I'm sure we will get into here.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I guess the main thing that we can kind of try and differentiate is like what is the difference between like your regular bond now and the internal bonds that are kind of mentioned within the white paper.
Yeah. So the underlying change is relatively simple. It is just, today when we do bonds, we only accept external assets in exchange for, the output is future dated ohm. So it's, at this point in the future, protocol will give you this amount of ohm. And you kind of get this like note. I like to think about it like a little slip of paper that just says, come back at this time and I'll give you this much. rather than just accepting external assets, having the protocol also accept ohm in exchange for that. And the reason for doing so is that we can expand a lot the velocity or scope of those, and then we can do things with those bond nodes that provide additional benefits. But in terms of there's a very strong staking parallel in that if you start with one SOM and over the course of 3 months it goes from 1 to 2 SOM, that would be the same thing as using 1 ohm to buy a bond note for 2 ohm in 3 months. The end result is the exact same. And one thing that I really like about that is the fact that it reduces a lot of confusion, or it makes the system a lot more clear in terms of the participant, the OMI, in terms exactly what you're getting out of this. There's no confusion. I think that one thing that's always a pain is anytime that the staking reward rate changes, even though it's done under a framework that's been a thing for 9 months now or something, it is always just a little bit of a shock, or at least an event. Whereas under this kind of a structure, there's little to no confusion about that, because you already have your promise, and that's upheld either way. Those tokens are sitting there waiting for you. The staking reward rate changing might change things into the future, but for you already have exactly what exactly what you're going to get out of this, and that doesn't affect you. So I think that at a minimum seems really beneficial to everyone. It's beneficial to you as an individual. It's also really beneficial to the protocol, and just knowing where its liabilities are, network stands, and being able to influence how it stands and operates into the future.
Yeah, I think predictability is what people want at the end of the
Yeah.
day. So, having these things in play, I mean, the yield curves themselves are very, very much leaning into predictability. There's a lot of things we can kind of get into as we run through, but maybe we can explain the difference between the kind of the NFT, the little the token note that you get back, and then the kind of ERC 20 for people, just to kind of really hone in on what are the differences. Are they both liquid? Is one of them a liquid? What happens, and what are the differences between those two kind of bonds specifically?
Yeah. So that's another shift that we have the ability to do so right now, but we haven't. So to date, what we've done is it's dubbed fixed term bonds, and so that is it should be familiar. If you get a bond, there's some vesting. Let's say it's a week. If I get one today, then I finish vesting in 7 days. If you get one tomorrow, you finish vesting in 7 days as well. Where the end date is 1 day apart because the start date is 1 day apart. In those cases, you can tokenize those into NFTs. You have to do it as an NFT because even if you and I do the same bond, but they're 1 second apart, the time that they expire is different. And so you can't lump those to be the same thing, even though everything else was the same. So with those, there's an ability. I think there's a project that's already, intending to do this. And interested where they're at, actually. But you can create secondary liquidity for that by creating an NFT of it and then trading it like you would an NFT. They're probably some of the easiest to value NFTs out there, right? There's not a lot of ambiguity, artistic value or whatever. Maybe, if you slap art on top of that, that could be cool. But valuation of those should be relatively simple. The other side is if we do what are called fixed expiration. So that is where you have a set time that these bonds end, and every day that passes, the vesting term just gets shorter. So, I get one today and it expires in 7 days. You get one tomorrow, it'll expire in 6 days. If that's the case, then we can tokenize those like a normal ERC20 because, doesn't matter when you got it. They're all going to be the same on the output. One of these ERC20 bond tokens is worth 1 ohm at some date into the future. That makes it a lot easier. That's the easiest thing to integrate and compose with, right? Because everything in DeFi is kind of structured around ERC20 tokens. So in that case, we can make like, Uniswap pools or sushi pools, or, we can integrate into Fuse, and kind of anything that we can do with them, you can do with those. But, so you can look at it as like, okay, well, what's the difference then? What's the point of this? The difference and the point is that the protocol's liabilities exist on Ohm. So it maintains all of this liquidity for Ohm, the token. SOM, which is, or GOM, which is, what we have today, you can think of as pretty much the same token as Ohm, because there's always infinite liquidity for you to go from SOM to Ohm, or from GOM to Ohm, or from GOM to SOM. Like that whole triangle is, exactly the same token essentially. In this case, when you introduce these bond tokens, you reintroduce a third-party liquidity provider dynamic, and that you can create these Uniswap pools, or whatever, but the protocol's liabilities are not to maintain the liquidity it bears. That's offloaded onto the market. And so, the dynamic that should arise is that, like, there are actually like downsides to protocol and liquidity, and that it almost is too good, and people can take advantage of it because it's too good. And so, activities that, like the reason that mercenary liquidity can be bad, other than the fact that, it's expensive, is, there are times when they're just going to ditch you and leave, and suddenly your market has no liquidity. But there are times when they should ditch you and leave. The easiest one is if there's, rampant debt building up in the market. Liquidity providers don't want to provide the liquidity to liquidate that. They don't view it as their responsibility, and so they're going to leave, and suddenly you're not able to, make good on these debts. Protocol doesn't do that, right? Protocol views it as, okay, these are my market's debts, and I'm going to make good on them. But by introducing this, we can kind of reintroduce that third-party liquidity provider dynamic in a way that doesn't remove the protocol and liquidity. It doesn't change that. It just makes it so that, if you're going to, take activities that will, have higher upside to you, it's going to insulate your downside from the rest of the market. If you're going to have, I think like lendings is kind of the easiest example here. If you're going to have some setup or transaction or whatever, where all of the upside of this is privatized between, you, the borrower, and the lender, or you, the lender, and the borrower. The downside of that should not be socialized onto everyone else. If you're not going to share the gains, why does everyone else have to pay for your losses?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it kind of reintroduces dynamics that, correct against that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it's kind of like you're removing the burden, like on the holder, and then transferring the illiquidity risk to the protocol, because the protocol can do that, and then letting the market kind of like dictate the interest rates, etc., and kind of have it all be something that is everyone. It's like a win-win in terms of like you were saying, like not socializing the losses if we're not socializing the gains.
Yeah, because I mean, like in a lending market dynamic, to liquidate a bond token, you're going to be reliant on liquidity being provided for that bond token to own. So what you need to do is, right now you can think about it as, if you unstake, the protocol is providing liquidity that takes your SOM or your GOM, and it gives you back all. And it, does so with no slippage, and it does so to an infinite degree. In this case, you're reliant on a third party doing so. It's not the protocol that can, controls the supply of Ohm and is able to make good on that, at no slippage, and doesn't ask for any upside in the equation and whatever. It's another person that is looking to, profit from this dynamic. And, you as the lender or the borrower need to be, assured that that liquidity is going to exist there. A lender is not going to want to lend to you if they're not confident that they're going to be able to liquidate your collateral if they need to. And that comes down to, okay, do the LPs here feel comfortable providing liquidity for this market segment? And that's going to come down to, okay, is there rampant level of some debt here? If that's the case, they're not. And so it should really push just that never happening, because everyone's incentives are aligned that it's worse for everyone if the system is systemically risked. it's not just the protocol that cares about that, but will pay for it at the end of the day. Everyone's incentives are aligned here that we all want to be safe. Um, and so hopefully, conceivably, that kind of thing does not happen again. Just by reintroducing these like third party dynamics into the equation.
And I guess one thing, hey Indigo, what's up? I guess one thing that's maybe you can touch on more is like how the nature of the way that bonds are set up at the moment put like kind of because they're not as frequent. But it also puts a cap on like puts because of the emissions, it puts a cap on the Treasury's ability to issue bonds in the first place. So maybe we can talk about how like with the current system, how it like puts kind of downward pressure in the terms of like revenue that we can get per bond, also because the premium has shrunk. So maybe we can talk about how, what because you already alluded to it, but like how, maybe this
Mhm.
internal bond system, alongside obviously staking, of course, would kind of be better suited
Yeah,
for the Treasury specifically.
yeah. So I mean, the way that this works best is if it is expensive relative to the supply of ohm. So you want a significant amount of supply to be available as liquidity, and to be deployed into these bond tokens rather than holding. Essentially the protocol provides additional upside in exchange for taking a liability off of its hands for some amount of time. Because like ohm is its liability. Like these bond tokens are a future liability and not a present liability. And so if we were to try to do this with the current structure where the only origination of bonds is with external assets, we just have a really significant capital constraint to that, which is if we want 30% or let's say 50% of supply in these bond tokens, protocol is going to need to sell half of the supply, and to do so it's going to have to realize half the market cap, and in doing so it's probably going to suppress that market cap because it's like liquidating significant chunks of supply. Not only that, but because these tokens expire, this is a recurring thing, and so it's going to have to liquidate 50% today, and then a couple months from now, it's going to have to do it again. Not something that's going to work. That would be a bad dynamic, just kind of in general. The way that bonds are run has never been to do such significant scale. What introducing like the internal bonds where you're accepting ohm is that this is something that happens away from the external market, so it has nothing to do with the market of ohm versus DAI or ohm versus ETH. It's completely contained and isolated into the Olympus market. And so now the protocol can convert a bunch of supply into these bond tokens, and it can accomplish that, so you can have this really deep liquidity between bond tokens and ohm, but without causing undue stress onto the system. It also, one other thing is just that if you're doing external bonds, like I guess I view it as a more dilutive relationship of either it's new entrants or a specific type of like recycler that's doing these transactions, versus, in this case with the internal bonds, it is much more like, current holders just expanding or getting the benefit of like the new supply being created in the same way that they do with the staking rewards today, where that's new supply, but it's not dilutionary. It's actually countered dilutionary. So I view that as a good one as well.
So it's like it's like essentially better segmentation, right? It's like essentially spreading kind of like the way that like it's just having obviously more control parameters in place. So because the protocol itself, is the big elephant in the room that can take on the illiquidity risk, but we just the main thing is kind of transferring that risk from the user to the protocol. That's the kind of recurring thing that like I kind of keep thinking about, but maybe you think about it differently. Is that kind of because it works to kind of by segmenting things, you like the market can kind of heal in extreme circumstances because the protocol has kind of like migrated some of that risk off users specifically.
Yeah. Mhm.
Gotcha. I just want to obviously say hello to Indigo. What's up? Obviously, co-author of the paper itself. Lovely to have you up here. Just wondering whether you wanted to kind of add anything as we continue to go through. He's all good. Um, I guess what we can maybe we can maybe an example off the top of your head might be a little bit too hard to kind of explain what that what that kind of segmentation might look like at a 20 million supply, for example. But maybe just like maybe instead of doing that, we can kind of touch on the way that this internal bond system would be reliant, kind of having like on the yield curves specifically, and having like the illiquidity. Like the greater the illiquidity, the yields increase. More liquidity, yields decrease. We can kind of like touch on how that functions basically.
Yeah. So, if we're going to create these bond tokens and have them in secondary markets, you got to figure out how to price them, right? Because now they have a price. And, what is the correct price? And, they're the real answer there is the correct price is whatever the market says it is, because you're essentially valuing time. But you can forecast that and you can model roughly what they should be. So that's what the yield curve essentially is. You have this relationship of the yields on them, which yield becomes a factor of price. So if you have this token discounted 50% and it expires in a year, you can think about that as 100% yield over the year. I guess it doesn't really matter the time frame, but that's 100% annualized years. But what the yield curve essentially forecasts, okay, how should these be priced so that people can then use that information to keep them in line and they can make money by doing that activity. It's like doing arbitrages between different pools on a coin or whatever, where you're providing a service of keeping markets efficient and you take a little spread for doing so. It's pretty basic, like incentivized behavior, I guess. The way that the yield curve should work is that you can project what SOM is going to yield for some amount of time, and that's like your safest option here. And so it should actually be the lowest yield because you don't have to deal with all of this or any of this like illiquidity risk and the fact that you're reliant on third party LPs. SOM GOM stick around, and the protocol is your LP, ensuring that you can get back to home. And so, that kind of serves as your baseline of, if a bond token yields less than that, why would you hold that bond token instead of being in the safer option? And so you're probably going to sell the bond token, you're going to stake. And by doing so, you're going to push the yield on the bond token back up until, it's now higher than staking would. But you can project out, for any span of time, pretty much, what SOM is going to return. And now you have a floor for the bond price. Or I guess a ceiling for the bond price. You have a floor for the bond yield. But then there's a relationship of, okay, the further out in time you go, the higher your illiquidity risk is going to be here. Because, if you're someone who is looking at, providing liquidity for bonds, you're going to feel the most comfortable with the nearest dated ones. Like the shortest term ones are going to be the safest because even if liquidity were to dry up for them, they're going to expire soon anyways. And then the protocol pays you out the underlying. And so you don't really need to worry about it as much as like if you're, providing liquidity for a bond that's like a year or two out. The liquidation event from the protocol is pretty far out. And so, it makes sense that liquidity is a bit thinner. So, you can expect with that you have a rising illiquidity premium, which is just like, if you had a 3-month bond that yields 10%, a 6-month bond is going to yield, at least 21%, which is, if you had a 3-month bond and then another 3 months at the end there, you'd end up with 21%. So that's going to be your kind of second floor on the bond yield. But then maybe there's a little bit of a premium on top of that. And then, for a 12-month bond, you have the same relationship where it should be, a 6-month times a 6-month, but then a little bit more of a premium on top of that. You get this like exponential curve that rises as the market prices in the liquidity. I think it's going to be super interesting to see. Like, I think that it would make sense for this to be a little inefficient to get started. The good thing is that inefficiency just creates opportunity. And that should just bring in people that capitalize off that inefficiency until the inefficiency is gone. But yeah, I mean, really, it should just lend itself to like much, much healthier markets.
Healthier markets, protocol bearing more of the risk which it can handle, is kind of what it seems. But not socializing those losses. I keep wanting to reiterate that, because I think that's something that's important. We had a couple. Let's see, we had a couple questions in here. We had, will the NFT bonds be listed and tradable on the Odyssey's NFT marketplace? Thinking. That's interesting. Is that more something that will have all different bond markets from all different providers, or is that something that will all come through our main site, for example?
I mean, they're going to be, I would imagine it comes down to who creates the bond token, but probably permissionless and working like any other NFT. So that really just comes down to like, does someone list it there? But that's a choice just like anything else. And even in the case of like, okay, you could have an NFT here that's actually not permissionless, and like maybe it blocks certain people from transferring it or whatever. In that case, what can just happen is someone else spins up a tokenized, contract, and those ones are not permissioned. Where these are all things built permissionlessly on top of the system, and it's really up to the builders of those things how they work. Same goes for the vault, right? So maybe I should hang out or hold off on the vaults for a minute.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I was like, we can. The vaults are also very interesting, which I want to get into in a second. We had someone, do you envision separate liquidity pools for each maturity dated bond, or blended pools, for example? I guess maybe you can touch on like why blended pools might pose more risk or why it mightn't, and then whether it makes more sense to have isolated for each dated bond.
It's an interesting question. By blended pool, do you mean like a balancer pool where you have multiple tokens in the same LP?
Yeah, I think that's what Gorilla is referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I think it's really going to come down to what LPs like to LP with. So, it might be that they. It's actually really. I hadn't thought too much about it, but there's a lot of cases where I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, though. Like anyone can create a balancer pool or Uniswap pool and put these tokens in there. So it comes down to where does the liquidity kind of get attracted to and form in. Could be both, could be only one, could be neither. Like, who knows?
Yeah, I feel like that's something that, as the market becomes more efficient, I think we'll see, people's preference, like LP's preference, right?
Yeah, I think there's a very cool. I really had not thought about that much, but that lends itself really well to arbitraging between the bond tokens, where maybe it's less important that you have liquidity back to Ohm, and so that's actually instead of being 50% of the pool, Ohm only makes up 20% of the pool, and instead you have a bunch of liquidity between different bond expiries, and so it makes it really easy for people to arb between those, less than just trading back and forth with Ohm itself, which might be easier if like Ohm itself becomes scarce in this equation, because I think that there's a decent likelihood that it does, where more and more of the supply is in future dated Ohm instead of current, and so it's actually like kind of hard to find Ohm to then put into liquidity pools, so that could provide like a nice alternative there.
Yeah, because they also mentioned, like, would it be likely that liquidity dries up closer to maturity? And yeah, I'd assume so. And like what Zeus is saying, is you to have that kind of jumping between like the other existing dated bonds, right? I guess that you could see something like that playing out.
I would act my intuitive expectation is that liquidity becomes deeper closer to maturity. Um, because it's safer to LP for it. Because you know that it's going to become liquid, on a protocol level quite quickly. But then there's a friction cost, I guess, of like why deposit LP for this token if you're just going to have to remove it in a week. Um, yeah, that would actually
Yeah, I
provide like a
guess
pretty easy substitute there, I guess.
I guess in that scenario, would that be something where Ohm would step in and kind of provide that bridging liquidity in some sense, or like that kind of not exit liquidity, but that kind of just to ensure that because I mean, it does make sense that LPs would deposit when there's more predictability. Um, but I guess yeah, I guess that's an interesting thing to think about. Um,
Yeah, I
we
think that
did touch
that's
on
kind of
this
the
mint
case
and
where that's
burn, but can Zeus oh, sorry, I was gonna pose one more.
go
Go on,
for it. No,
in
no,
your
no.
train of thought. We can come back to the question. I was gonna say, we did touch on this mint and burn, but I was wondering whether Zeus could elaborate why the current bonding structure is not scalable, or is not effective at decreasing leverage in the system. We did briefly touch on this, but I'll let kind of Zeus explain things.
Uh, Wait, could you? Okay, here we go. Um, well, it's just kind of separate, right? They don't really have much to do with each other right now. So we're not using bonds as it kind of is inherently, but it's not particularly scaled as a alternative exposure means. It's much more just like a purpose thing, um, to grow the treasury. Whereas this expands it to this is a different form of exposure, um, and by it's hard to scale just in the sense of it requires external assets to come to the treasury, and instead of doing that in like a slow and gradual manner, you would need to do so in a much like higher capacity and scale, um that like probably just doesn't make sense. um it's it will break the economics of for pretty much everyone. Like everyone loses in that equation. Not like you can look at it as like, oh, the protocol gets to like sell more bonds, but like it's gonna make a lot less off of those. But by converting this into a much more scaled alternative means of exposure, you're moving people. Essentially the dynamic that you have is that you could have plenty of people just taking on leverage using SOM or GOM like they do today, but they're sacrificing yield and underperforming everyone else in that equation. And so at a bare minimum, you're just penalizing that activity. Everyone else, they're losing market share to everyone else who's not partaking in that or is doing so in a structure that is less systemically risky to everyone else. So it's a bit of a carrot to be responsible and a
Mm.
stick when you're not.
Mm. And I guess like the internal bonds like on the leverage question is just like a big sink, right? For supply. So it actually helps the protocol itself focus more on the treasuries like objective because it knows when supply is going to become liquid. Which is
Mhm.
like a big kind of unlock in my opinion because you're like again segmenting all this risk, one across all the different expiries, one the other kind of being transferring the illiquidity risk from the holder to the protocol, and then just kind of having everything be risk adverse to kind of really better control supply, right? And then that itself
Yeah,
probably answers to the leverage kind of like reduction, I think.
yeah.
But
There's actually like
I want to. You can go for it. Go for it.
I feel like there's an interesting perspective if you look at the relationship between the protocol and the holders of Ohm, where it's actually somewhat adversarial, right? So if Ohm is a liability to the protocol, um, then there is a sense of adversarial, relationship between the holders of Ohm and the protocol, where the protocol is interested in its growth and success, whereas holders are interested in their own growth and success. Um, I kind of look at this as in a sense, a divide and conquer tactic. on the part of the protocol. So what the protocol wants to do, kind of what all of this is predicated on, is it wants to dominate the market. That the protocol should be able to say, this is going to happen. And because it is in a dominant position, everyone believes it. It's very credible in that. And so the only real move to make is to make that happen. There's no point in fighting against it. You just do it. And right now, when you have the structure of all ohm is liquid at all times, it's like having an adversary that is very large versus breaking that up into smaller groups. Whereas now, the one, the actual liability of liquid ohm is much smaller, and so the position of the protocol and the dominance of the protocol expands linearly with that, maybe even exponentially with that. And so you actually changing nothing else, just expand the influence and credibility of the treasury, by nature of its liabilities have now shrunk. It has, in a sense, kicked them down the road. It's converted or current liabilities into future liabilities, but it knows when those future liabilities expire and become current. And it also controls the rate at which they become future. And so, it now has an immensely greater amount of influence that, we can get into. I think I'm going to talk about this stuff because I'm tired of dancing around that. Maybe you'll later in the call, but
yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we can maybe we can. There's been I saw a few people kind of touching on the, is there going to be an automated strategy I can put my money into? So maybe we can get into vaults and how those third party vaults might function.
Yeah. So the idea with vaults is, I think a really easy parallel is just, you could go onto some chain and you could look for the highest yields and you could manage an active portfolio that's farming here and there and, do all this, complicated whatever, or you could just deposit into Urine. And Urine does all of those things, and you just get the benefit of it. They abstract away all the complexity, they do all the hard work, and you're just providing capital so that they can leverage economies of scale. That's how vaults should work. So they allow you to deposit, and then they put deposits into different bonds, and they might provide liquidity with them, and they might manage a portfolio that optimizes for whatever they're trying to optimize for. I think that the really cool thing with this is that it's completely permissionless. Anyone can start a vault. So you might have some that might optimize for liquidity. Because you have this illiquidity risk or whatever inherent into this structure. Or I don't know, I don't know if I like the word risk, but concern, or it's something that you have to think about more than with SM. So, maybe one of them is very focused on just ensuring constant liquidity. And so they're okay with lower yields because they're going to deploy into SM and the nearest dated bonds, and they're going to run strategies that are always optimized so that they have, liquidity on hand that people can move in and out, as freely as they want. You can go there and you can withdraw as much as you want right at that point in time, and it's no problem. And then maybe you have a different vault that is very focused on returns, and they're okay with illiquidity. The depositors in there are inherently, having chosen this vault, are okay with illiquidity. So maybe to withdraw from this vault, you need to wait a week. You need to signal hey, I want to leave, and so you need to source liquidity for me to leave. But the upside of that is that they are depositing into longer dated bonds, and they're doing activities that return more because there's a higher level of illiquidity attached to it. And it really just comes down to where's the demand? So what are people looking for? Is the most demand in lower yield, higher liquidity? Is it a mix? I would imagine it is a mix where it's just different people are going to optimize for different things. Where maybe more short-term participants are gonna look for those very liquid vaults, and people that are okay, I'm just gonna be 3-3 here for the next long period of time. let me go to the one that like, has more illiquidity attached, because I don't care, I'm not going to be using it. And if I do, I'm going to be planning more than a week or two in advance that I can just signal, hey, let me out. And it really just comes down to what you want to do. It's all about optionality. But it really, I think that
Exactly.
the UX there, I mean, it's going to come down to the individual vaults, right? Where they are incentivized to make their UX very good, because they want you to deposit with them, especially in a competitive environment where other people might do it better than them. And so they're going to be striving to, constantly improve. But you can do the simple route, you can do the complex route, you can do the safe for the risk you want, or whatever you want to do. All within the in a structure that is like beneficial to the protocol, and also like it
Hmm.
increases the amount of activity that's beneficial to the network.
Yeah. I think this actually is like a perfect segue into like how like a repo market might work, short for repurchase market. So it's kind of like a way that someone might be able to borrow liquid ohm against that, like tokenize a liquid bond, in the case of maybe there is like a very extreme scenario where there is a run on deposits. Not that again, that's not, I don't think that's a significant risk, it's more concern. But before we talk into that, I just want to clarify, like, so people, let's say that this is a concern, they wouldn't want to necessarily put their funds in this kind of mutual fund vault scenario. Staking still exists, right? So that's kind of where where this option, like there's going to be so many options, right, for people. Ohmies can still 3 native stake, but they're going to also have this option further up the kind of yield curve / like risk curve, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. So it doesn't go anywhere. It really just comes down to what you're looking for, right? So, longer term people, are going to be able to act higher reward as as a result of the fact that they are less concerned about near term liquidity. For people that are very concerned about that, are just going to lose share of the network, which it's reminiscent of like lock staking proposals in that regard. It's about just like different people are going to look for different things and optimize for different things, and you should like allow that rather than lumping everyone into the same category.
Yeah,
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah,
I'd like to clarify something that you mentioned. You just mentioned, Rob. I would not consider these as mutual funds structures, but more as a long-term staking mechanism, if you will, and a way for the protocol to have predictability of liquidity in the market, by means of knowing what are the expiring dates and size of the different bonds on the different dates. As Sus was saying,
yeah.
short term. So the reference yield curve will be the spot staking mechanism, which is the one that we all know. And then from that into the future, you will have buckets of liquidity that are sucking liquidity out of the market, bundling it in an NFT, and that can trade in secondary markets. So depending on your view of the market into the future, those bonds will trade up or down in yield, right? And that there was some question there in the chat. They were asking what's the impact on the supply and demand, where basically this will be sucking supply and pushing it into the future. While today there's no way to predict how many people will unstake, right? We know roughly what the range where the number shows, but if people want to unstake and have immediate liquidity, they can do it. Well, in the NFT wrapping mechanism for bonds, we know that whether 3 months from now there will be X amount of liquidity expiring, right? But that's out of the market for 3 months, right? Bondholders will still have liquidity if they want to trade their bonds, right? But the inside the NFT will be bundled for that period of time. But it's not. I would not consider it a mutual fund, right? And then if
Yeah,
someone
sorry, I didn't want to. Didn't
no,
want
Well,
to conflate things
I
there,
would,
and wasn't
yeah,
wasn't trying
I
to
would
give
just,
you the.
I'd just say like the vaults are separate from anything. So like, Yearn deposits into Curve. That doesn't mean that Curve has anything to do with Yearn.
yeah,
Those are independent protocols that they could be structured like that. If it really just comes down to like what they're doing, right? Um, so I don't think that there's any way to say it either way with any level of confidence. But the real answer just seems like it doesn't have any impact or bearing on Olympus itself. Um, right? They're independent protocols and operators that can structure, act however they choose to act, right? Like I think that that's a really important thing. Is just like that these will be their own protocols. Maybe it's existing protocols. Like maybe Yearn decides to make a pond vault. But I would expect that there will also be new ones that form just around this. But like those are their own protocols. I'm excited for the fact that like I think that they can become like sub communities for us. Where here's a vault that like is its own project, is its own community, but lives within the wider Olympus community. And you have kind of closer like I think a really good comparison there is like Olympus is part of the Ethereum community, but it's one of many projects in the Ethereum community. And you have an overbearing Ethereum community, and you have people that are more interested in just like the protocol itself. But there's a lot of things built on top of it. Everything. Everyone's incentives are kind of aligned with the success of ETH or maybe Ethereum. But like the community of Olympus is very different, and might not have too much to do with the community of like another project. And I would view that as a good thing personally. Just again, it's optionality. It's
Yeah, yeah, I get it 100%. It's like, well, it's in line with everything that like Ohm is trying to accomplish, right? In terms of building out like a larger, you know, economy. I can't say it. It's always really hard to pronounce properly. It sounds stupid. But I can
I've just
assure
started
you that
saying
is what we're working
economy.
towards. Yeah, I know. The amount of
Yeah.
times I try to like actually emphasize the own part makes me sound like I've had some aneurysm. Um, we've had a
Lies.
few. No, we've had a few good cues which we'll get to, but maybe because we've obviously talked about the vaults themselves, but maybe we can get into like the possibility of how a repurchase market might work, and then I can kind of go back through some of the other questions, and then we'll leave it to the last 5-10 minutes for people to if they want to ask any other questions.
There is one right now that I'm looking at that I think would be good to address as well.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah, we
I
can
can
you
hold on
can
to it, but
digress and head there. Yeah, no, you can digress.
uh,
Go.
just Nash asked is like why 12 to 18 month goal rather than something sooner. Um, the intent there was like more just to emphasize like this doesn't need to be like this is not coming from a place of like panic or like we need to do this immediately or whatever. It should be something that we're just coming together on. First, do we want to do this? But then being very confident in how we do this. Um, I think it would be great if it were to come together sooner. There are a couple things that I think that we should. I think the biggest ones are intent of participation, where we want this to probably be something that scales relatively quickly relative to the supply of ohm. I think being very confident in the mechanistic changes that are introduced. This is one of the first times that we've really made like a tangible change to the infrastructure mechanics at play with the network. And we should definitely be very confident that that's a good thing and that it's going to function as expected and it did. I think that we should really aim that these vaults are ready to go. In that it's unreasonable to expect that everyone is going to like run active strategies themselves, and like a really important thing there is that like day one you have these vaults that help all of this scale up by just accepting deposits and doing that work, and like there's coordination between them that we know what structure needs to come into place, and that they're going to take those deposits and build out that infrastructure. I think it could happen sooner. It could be longer. I think these are kind of unknowns that we should just be like very meticulous in implementation, that we get it right. that it goes smoothly, that there's no real like chaos that ensues. Like, oh, one more thing is just like that the whole community and anyone involved in like other protocols or whatever knows what's going on, is confident in how they should act and respond, and that it's not like blindsiding anyone. So the intent there was just to kind of emphasize like these are things that are going to take time. It shouldn't be looked like as like throw this onto a snapshot and get it through immediately and like throw this up next week. I think especially like I'm hoping that it can kind of help mature a governance process in that I think that the longer we've been around and the more mature we are, like the longer we should spend on each decision that we make, especially when they're larger ones. We don't need to be moving fast and breaking things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also like it's important to note that because it's a great question, right? But then I think it's important to note that some of the when things are implemented, there needs to be this like it needs to be time passed. There needs to be time for like people to communicate, collaborate, reach out to different people, have those ideas, marinate amongst other people who haven't seen them, get different feedback from people outside of the economy. I think that's like really important for something like this because this, given the depth of the paper, I think very much it will end up being another catalyst for Olympus. So it's important that we do get these things right, and have these open discussions with the community and anyone within DeFi specifically, because a lot of Ethereum improvement proposals are sometimes in the works for 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. I mean, look at staking itself. It's still they still haven't moved away from proof of work. So these things aren't easy to snap your fingers and have done within a month. So yeah, I just want to kind of also throw out my kind of point of view on that. We did have.
Yeah.
I'm
Did we
just
do the
want to be conscious
repo
of your
question?
time. Yeah, we can come back to that. I was just going to say how
I forgot about
the
that. My bad.
event. No, it's all good. It's all good. I was like in the event of a vault, maybe experiencing some kind of liquidity concerns. How might like repo markets function on a user level, and then how might the protocol itself step in and benefit from that in the sense that obviously like they're better controlling the market, but also like making sure that users aren't suffering any losses or the third parties themselves.
Yeah. So I would say just first, like I think a deal should be that the protocol is not doing anything in these markets. So the ideal would be that all of this activity and everything running smoothly is happening with third parties based on their incentives and that their upside is the same as these markets functioning efficiently and it's in everyone's best interest. But if you had some situation of a vault, especially like a vault that or maybe multiple vaults that especially if they're providing a lot of the bond or secondary bond market liquidity, are seeing a lot of draws. They only have a portion of their deposits in like liquid tokens, so ohm or sohm at a given time. And if everyone is trying to withdraw, then there's a point at which we don't have enough cash on hand to pay these people out. You do have like the value reflected, but it's in these future dated tokens and not current data. In that situation, what you can do is you can have lending facilities that will provide short-term loans. So what you don't want is that they need to be liquidating positions and in a very short period of time trying to liquidate a bunch of these bonds for liquid tokens, because you're just going to push the pricing out of whack for no reason except like here's a short period of volatility that is forcing us to make these actions. What you would do in that situation is maybe you have a repo market, which is essentially that you would borrow or technically like buy liquid ohm with the bond token, but it's only a very short term transaction. And, maybe after a couple of, it could be seconds or minutes or hours, you're going to make that trade back. And so, you haven't actually like sold them. You're just getting short-term liquidity so you can make sure that you, are providing whatever liquidity you need without having to, overwhelm the market in a very short period of time with all of this like bond supply. So, I think that you can look at it as like if you had to sell like 10,000 future dated ohm in a single transaction versus borrowing the value of that in current ohm today and then swapping that market or that order through over the course of like a couple hours, where doing so allows the market to respond and provide the liquidity you need, so you're getting fair pricing, you're not really messing up the entire market, and then you just pay back that short-term loan with a little bit of interest, which is the incentive for the person that's lending it to you. Yeah, where it just ensures that the market is functioning as it should. I guess TLDR, a way to assuage that liquidity concern is here's like short-term liquidity that prevents like irrational behavior from having to be taken.
That
I know
I
it's a
think
little
that
complicated.
covers. No, it's not complicated. I think it makes it like as Gorilla, who's also putting in some interesting comments about like an overnight repo op, where protocols give own collateral plus interest in exchange for own bonds. I think there's a lot of cool conversations going on here. Motion to nominate Zeus for Fed chair. All in favor. Say ohm, please. In the chat, I need some ohms in the chat. Zeus for Fed chair. All right, seems like we're getting a little bit of. Seems like people are keen.
Well, one of my
have
favorite
some,
things about this.
Yeah, go.
Just very quickly, it's been really cool. Like the number of independent ideas that have stemmed from this, and like the thing is that this is like not. If you're into finance, these are not super foreign ideas and concepts, and it's just very cool to see like people kind of step in with like, oh, well, what if we did this? And it's like, oh, that's actually really cool, and I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, I really, that was going back to like why like 12 to 18 months. It's so that we have time that like people can contribute. I'm not trying to make the claim that this is like the perfect setup and this is it. This is kind of what I'm looking at it as, and like I don't know, it's just really cool to see other people like add into that. Good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of having something be open where people can exchange ideas.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
100%.
We did have a couple questions. I mean, maybe I can get your. So what are some? I mean, with the current system, what are some things that you have been noticing? Maybe it's not you specific. Maybe we can get someone up from policy who might be able to like who's looking at it more closely. But what are like some of the key metrics that we look at to determine ohms growth at the moment? We did have someone kind of touch on the fact, whether it be, is the backing per ohm like the fact that it's not necessarily going up? Is that like a a big red alarm for policy? Is that something that's like, okay, that we understand that that's the case, so therefore we can't issue as many bonds? Maybe we can kind of like first of all touch on some of the things that you actively kind of monitor, and then maybe I can pull up. I did see Potted in the audience. Maybe I can bring them up as well if they feel like touching on it.
Yeah, so if he wants to come up, please do. But that one, I understand why it's like viewed as a negative. I mean, I just view it as a neutral thing. So the reason that it just goes down is that the staking rewards are, distributing new tokens out, and like, if assets are unchanged, it's not a bad thing. It's just that you're changing the number of, assets per token because there's now more tokens. The reality is that Ohm is more backed than it's ever been by like multiples. So if anything, that's just like normalizing it. If it is expanding premium, so there's kind of like two ways that premium can expand, right? There's like price per token goes up relative to assets per token, or you just increase the supply and assets don't change. So I get that it's like, oh, line go down and that looks bad, but like you got to look at it relative, I think. In which case it's like, well, okay, so this is just kind of a wash. You can actually make it deflationary. Ohm actually during that whole drawdown, the supply of Ohm decreased by 17%. The actual supply, the amount of tokens held by actual people like diminished very significantly. There's probably not a single other case of any asset or token in this industry ever decreasing its supply in response to like a calamity in the same way. But you got to kind of separate like the supply of Ohm versus the supply of Geom, essentially.
That's a great point. It's also worth noting, like as Zeus mentioned, the backing per like the backing per Ohm is an all-time high. I think it's above 50% of all Ohm is backed, which is at its highest has ever been. So I think it just depends on the obviously that's the one thing that people can choose to look at, but there are a bunch of other things that make more sense to look at given the kind of overarching market conditions. But Potted, I'll let you maybe touch on some things that policy specifically keep an eye on as well, if you feel like disclosing.
What was the question?
Oh, just like some things that policy that closely monitor on a week-to-week basis in terms of like how to determine health in the system or growth, or just like some things that maybe for people who are a little bit less aware, like the key kind of metrics on a week-to-week basis. Sorry.
Now we're in the future, or
yeah, currently.
Today?
So obviously not with the internal system, because we don't know how that will exactly function. It's very much a proof of concept. So maybe
I have an idea of what I want to track. Then I mean, it's basically discounts. I mean, we and Zeus kind of caught the tail end of an internal call we had the other day where we were saying that we kind of should be able to look at the total amount of money that's moving through the bond system at any given time, because there's a certain limit in terms of how much capital can be dedicated toward being locked into the bond system that we have right now, where we move things to 14 days. We ended up locking a significant amount of money, and we saw discounts move a lot higher. That's one of the reasons we moved to the lower vesting terms, because it just makes it so that money can cycle through a lot faster. Is my audio having problems?
Gotcha. No. We
Okay.
we hear you loud and clear. That makes sense.
Okay.
And then I guess the other thing that
All right, can
some
I
people in
tag on to
the
that?
chat were tag go for it.
So these fix that in that, there's a cool dynamic of, the current bond system is like a primary market. So you have, the protocol is the issuer, and it's the counterparty on trades. With the secondary market, the expectation is actually that the primary market no longer is interacted with by people. That is because, you're going to be looking for the best execution. And if any time that the primary market is cheaper than the secondary market, there's just an arbitrage opportunity that a bot is going to beat you to it. And they're just going to buy the primary, they're going to sell the secondary, and, take their arc. Where I would actually expect discounts to compress a lot more, by virtue of the fact that, right now it's like a time-based game, where, you got to be in the right place at the right time to snatch this discount. And if no one is, or if there's only a small number of people doing it and they're liquid after they do it, those discounts rise. Like that's kind of what we're seeing, and what Potter was just saying is that, if there's only, some capital pool running these bonds, if you put longer vesting terms, then suddenly their capital is all locked up, and no one is there to do it. In this case, the person doing it is just an arbitrager. And so, like, the discounts get derived from, instead of like single point in time, like who's there, and it's a game of chicken of like who's gonna blink first and buy it. It's just, okay, what's the secondary market valuing it at, based on supply and demand perpetually. And so those dynamics diminish. I think that's what allows these to, like, right now, if we were to do like a 1-year bond with the current structure, like I don't know what those discounts would look like, but probably be very deep. Versus with the secondary market, they should be much more just in line with the yield curve. By virtue of the fact that it's not a liquid for you, it's a liquid on the protocol's level, but not on your level.
What the thing that's neat about the V2 as well is that one of the things we'll probably be monitoring is that we're going to end up with kind of an effective reward rate based on the amount of like discount our internal bonds go to. So we'll probably be keeping track of that a lot as well, right? Like if people are willing to buy these internal bonds for low discounts, we're effectively, it depends on how we hook things up, but we're either effectively lowering our reward rate, or we're getting more set aside for the same reward rate, kind of locked up or less liquid over the long term. So there'll be that kind of push and pull with the V2 system.
Yeah. You just worded something that I was trying to figure out how to word.
Okay, cool.
Like the discounts, the discounts on the internal bonds are the same as the discounts on the external bonds. So if people on internal bonds are, okay with where right now it'd be a 4% discount, they're okay with a 1% discount. Now the external bonds have a 1% discount because the output is the exact same. It's just like, what is the input of this, but the outcome is the same. So that's kind of what I was getting at in terms of like diminishing those, is that you're opening participation a lot more, and reducing an element of like being in the right place at the right time and perpetually doing this activity that should diminish that to I would expect a pretty significant degree.
I mean, talking about execution and market, participation, we haven't even talked about the possibility of cross chain kind of participation, but like mainnet execution, being kind of like doing all this activity on L2s or roll ups, and then having it all kind of be routed to Ethereum for execution. Maybe we can touch on like some of the like cross chain kind of like research and development going on internally, and like how do you see this kind of like these market driven interest rates playing out, and then we can maybe get back to some of the questions that we might not have missed, and we can wrap this up.
Yeah, where's Indigo at, man? Yeah, I mean, Pod, you can probably touch on that. I can just keep talking. I feel like I'm dominating conversation. Oh, he's gone. Okay. So, because the primary market is like less significant or insignificant on a user facing basis at this point, these secondary markets can exist anywhere. So it could be that, like origination of the token is that the bond is bought on Ethereum, but then it's bridged over to Arbitrum or to wherever. And that's where the secondary market lives. And so where people are actually interacting is on a much cheaper chain, where, like the base protocol still gets the benefit of being on native Ethereum, but that's not where people need to transact and interact directly. There's also there's a whole game plan or whatever in R&D for like native staking on other chains, and kind of having rather than like bridged per se tokens, like the same native system kind of anywhere. I'm not the authority on that. Like, I understand it, but at the same time, like I wouldn't want to like step on toes and be the person really like going into detail.
Yeah, Indigo had to jump off because he's at ETH Denver, so I think there's a lot of things are a bit chaotic over there at the moment. So he had to
He's
kind
too
of jump
cool
off.
for
But
us.
maybe we can we can definitely have him on at a later date to explain some of the like cross chain research / development going on internally, because I know there's a lot of cool things going on, but we don't want to kind of put out info, prematurely before we, kind of push out all these interesting developments.
Or be wrong.
We
I
do
just don't want to be wrong.
yeah, true. I think we've actually historically made a lot of like good conservative moves when it comes to kind of like maybe like delaying some kind of partnership, and then it actually has worked out. I think we've been very, our analyst or analysis side of the DAO has done a really good job at assessing, risks that are unnecessary that we do, or like concerns that probably are something that we can kind of wait on until the infrastructure itself is good enough to then pursue that route. But I do think cross chain is definitely largely unsolved, so it does require like a lot of research into the best solutions out there, because we don't want to be
first.
obviously, safety is definitely at the forefront of everyone's minds relating to that. We did have I guess, like, I know, going back to the kind of metrics we watch, Memeplex is kind of brought up again that we haven't heard that tracking the backing per share is greater than emissions, and he kind of touches on how that's an important metric to optimize for because it measures true growth. Maybe I don't know what your thoughts are, but I don't know if that's entirely true. Maybe you have another opinion. On kind of what he means.
It measures whether the treasury is growing at the same rate that supply is. But even if it isn't, that's not really like a bad thing, especially, if price per token has fallen, all you're doing is having the system normalize itself to lower prices. Like it doesn't, like if backing per token is decreasing, that doesn't mean that anything is contracting. It just means that there's more supply, and thus, the
Yeah, so I guess the benefits of more like a better distributed supply, offset the kind of the reset in backing per ohm to emissions, right?
I would just look at
Like
it.
the benefits themselves.
The good way to look at it is adjusting for the index. So, just take away the component of, ohm as the denominator. If like, you're trying like that, it's viewed, I think, in the sense that like it already is index adjusted, but that's what you need to do if you're actually looking at like value. So, essentially like that, backing per ohm token is the equivalent of like you're backing if you're just holding ohm. But the reality is like very few people are doing so. You're actually holding S ohm, and that's a very different thing.
Yeah, S ohm or G ohm is completely different, right? To just holding naked ohm, which is not anything anyone is doing at the moment besides the protocol.
Like that goes down by default and like by design,
Yeah. Before we kind of round everything out, because I know we've been going for an hour and a half, just want to be conscious of everyone's time. Is there anyone else? Any other questions, Omis? Feel free to jump up, ask them in the chat. We can pose them before we wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes on the half hour. Okay, so you might have missed this one, Mayo, but what other activities does this model relating to the secondary market align more? What does it do to align more with incentives that the protocol holders looks for that hasn't been addressed yet?
Yeah.
So
One thing that comes to mind,
little long-winded.
Yeah. One that comes to mind that I think is pretty cool is like time-based lending. So if you have loans that expire at a certain time, those align super well here. Where you could have a bond that expires at some date, and you have a loan that expires at the same date. And at that point, like the illiquidity concern of the bond token doesn't exist, because by the time repayment is meant to occur, it's liquid owned. And we can kind of optimize there. There's a still kind of working out how this would work, but there's like an opening for, I was talking to someone yesterday, under collateralized lending, where let's say that, you know, between now and some period in the future, like SOM is going to go from 1 to 1.8. But you have a bond that is going to go from 1 to 2. You could use the bond that's worth 1 to borrow, like 20% more under the same, like, you know, you have a repayment date kind of a structure. You could use that as collateral to actually take out an under collateralized loan. And for the lender, they're going to get back what they're supposed to.